Hello everyone, back tuning into our latest Star Wars video. So, writer-director of Star Wars Episode 9, JJ Abrams, has just conducted an interview with fastcompany.com. It's a wide-ranging interview where he talks about Star Wars Episode 9 and also about his production company, Bad Robot. It's a very long interview. Most of these are relevant to Star Wars, but there are a couple of points within the interview that are very, very relevant to Star Wars Episode 9 and do cause me quite a bit of concern, I have to say, about this film. Once again. So we'll go over the interview, or at least a relevant part of the interview to Star Wars in a moment. Just say that if you're enjoying the Star Wars content on this channel, then please like, share and subscribe. Trying to build the channel back up once again. So Star Wars Celebration is just a couple of days away, and on Friday, 12th of April, that's going to be the day of the Star Wars Episode 9 panel, where the trailer for Star Wars Episode 9, the teaser trailer, and also the title of the film will be revealed. And I think JJ Abrams has done this interview ahead of Star Wars Celebration. So we're at fastcompany.com, link to this in the description. They begin by asking JJ Abrams how it feels to be back after being away so many months filming Star Wars Episode 9, and that's not particularly relevant to what we're looking for in this particular video. The next question, though, is relevant. So this is from Fast Company. How did it feel when you were suddenly brought on to direct Episode 9 after Colin Trevorrow departed while the film was still in development? Now, just to talk about that a little bit, Colin Trevorrow was due to direct Star Wars Episode 9. He'd been announced as a director for this film several years ago. If anyone knows anything about the Star Wars films under the guidance of Kathleen Kennedy at Lucasfilm Limited, they'll know there has been that the whole sort of projects that they've done so far have tended to be littered with varying disasters of people being fired, people being brought on board at the last minute. So Episode 7 was done very haphazardly, where JJ Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan were brought in to write and direct the film, after the original writer, Michael Arndt, and also, of course, George Lucas himself were fired. In the case of Michael Arndt, and George Lucas stepped away. Then there was Han Solo, a Star Wars story, that turned into a production nightmare, went hundreds of millions of dollars over budget, and the original directors, Lord and Miller, they shot around 70-80% of the film before Kathleen Kennedy fired them and brought Ron Howard in to completely redo the film. And that's the reason that one went so severely over budget. And at this point, after being released at cinema and also being released on DVD, made a substantial loss. It is at a substantial loss still, because of how far over budget that film went. And then, of course, we have the fiasco with Colin Trevorrow, and Star Wars Episode 9. He was due to direct this film, been announced years in advance, and he was sort of fired again, let go by Kathleen Kennedy, and she brought on board JJ Abrams to pick up the baton from Colin Trevorrow. So let's go back to the interview. That's brought you sort of up to date with what's been going on at Lucasfilm, the mess up this whole sort of project has been under the guidance of Kathleen Kennedy. Strangely enough, the only film that has run completely smoothly so far has actually been The Last Jedi, the one that turned out to be so very unpopular and divisive with the fans. But from a production point of view, no problems at all. I think Rian Johnson, with his idea of letting the past die and killing off all of our favourite characters, was very much on board with Kathleen Kennedy, despite the fact that when she took over the company from George in 2012, she had promised to respect the characters that George had created, and she promised to protect them. But it seems like Ryan's idea of letting the past die and a character assassinating Luke Skywalker sort of tied in with what Kathleen Kennedy wanted to do, because that's the only film so far where there hasn't been some sort of production disaster on it. Anyway, let's get back to the interview. So, Fast Company, how did it feel when you were suddenly brought on to direct episode 9 after Colin Trevorrow departed while the film was still in development? JJ Abrams says, I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't the guy, you know. I was working on some other things and I had something else that I was assuming would be the next project, if we'd be so lucky. And then Kathy Kennedy called and said, would you really seriously consider coming abroad? And once that started, it all happened pretty quickly. The whole thing was a crazy leap of faith, and there was an actual moment when I nearly said, no, I'm not going to do this. I was trepidatious to begin with getting involved because I love Star Wars so much, which we know from The Force Awakens, because that's like a love letter to George Lucas's original Star Wars film, and that's one of the reasons that I very dislike The Force Awakens. But anyway, getting back to JJ Abrams, so I was trepidatious to begin with getting involved because I love Star Wars so much and felt like it was almost on a personal level a dangerous thing to get too close to something that you care that much about. And yet with Force Awakens, I feel we managed to introduce these new characters, for some people new actors, and continue a story in a way that I thought had heart and humanity and humour and surprise. I disagree with most of that, to be honest, but never mind, we'll carry on. Though of course I'm aware there are critics of that movie. I felt like we dodged a bullet. Like, we got in there, we got to do something, and I left loving Star Wars as much as I did when I got there. Like, somehow it was, on a personal, selfish level, something I was really happy to have done. Not just excited about doing it, but happy to have done it. And to ask to have that happen again, I felt a little bit like I was playing with fire. Like, why go back? We managed to make it work. What the hell am I thinking? And there was a moment when I literally said no, and Katie, I think that's JJ Abrams' wife, said, you should do this. And my first thought was, has she met someone? And then I thought, she's usually right about stuff like that. So, and when she said it, I think that she felt like it was an opportunity to bring to a close this story that we have begun and had continued, of course. And I could see that even though the last thing on my mind was going away and jumping back into that, especially with the time constraints that we were faced with. And then we see that Fast Company says, what were the time constraints? Abrams replies, because they had announced the release dates and everything worked backwards. So going further on, Fast Company then asked, was the schedule unusually fast? This is worrying. Abrams says, to have no script and have a release date and have to be essentially a 2-year window when you're saying to yourself, you've got 2 years from the decision to do it to release the film, and you have literally nothing. You don't have the story, you don't have the cast, you don't have the designers, the sets. There was a crew, and there were things that will be worked on for the version that preceded ours, but this was starting over. Because this was such a mega job, I knew at the very least I needed a co-writer to work on this thing, but I didn't know who the co-writer would be. There was nothing. So the first thing I did was reach out to a writer who I've admired for years, Chris Terrio, who I didn't really know, to say, listen, would you want to write Star Wars with me? And he screamed. And then it goes on with more, but I don't think it's particularly relevant right now. So we may go over that a little bit more, though, further on in the interview. in a subsequent video, actually. There may be more in there that I've not had a chance to go through yet that could be relevant for a future interview. But I think I want to focus, first of all, with this interview on the fact that Abrams is telling us that once again, this film has been created at very, very short notice, really, for such a big project. So from the time that JJ Abrams signed on to do the film to the release date, they've only got 2 years. And at the point JJ Abrams is signing on, he's telling us that he had absolutely nothing. He had no, once again, had no plan. There was no story for this film. Everything that Colin Trevorrow had done seemingly was discarded again by the wondrous Kathleen Kennedy. What a name of infamy her name is going to be in years to come within the Star Wars community. I can't believe it, really, but there we are. Just 2 years with nothing at the point that JJ Abrams signed on. So very much in line with The Force Awakens, which was created really on the fly. Disney had announced that The Force Awakens was going to be released in 2015. At the start of 2014, they had pretty much nothing, and JJ Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan just had to throw the thing together without any guidance from George Lucas, because he'd got fed up with it all and left. And here we go again, the same sort of very haphazard production has occurred once again with Episode 9. Now, that doesn't mean that the film won't be any good, but it does mean it's starting with problems. It means particularly worrying is where JJ Abrams says that he has no story at this point. So once again, I've spoken about this so often in the Star Wars videos on this channel so far, with this sequel trilogy, there is no plan. They didn't have a plan for when they started to where they were going to end up. They didn't know what story they wanted to tell with these films. They're just going from one film to another, going off in all directions, trying to make something stick, trying to make some sort of story out of the thing. But there is nothing at this point that is bringing either the sequel trilogy together as a coherent whole, or making it marry up to the subsequent films, or the previous films, I should say. So there's nothing that's sort of bringing this sequel trilogy together as a coherent trilogy, and equally there is nothing particularly that makes these films work with George Lucas's 6-part opus. It is an incredibly haphazard and bizarre way to create Star Wars. I can't believe, really, that this has happened. I mean, even if Colin Trevorrow was removed from the production, which he was, you would think that they would roll over at least parts of his story and sort of go from there, build on it, if you like. But JJ Abrams appears to be saying that he had nothing. He had no story, no script, no cast, no sets built, absolutely nothing. 2 years from the release of the film. When George was making the prequels, it took him 3 years between films, and he knew broadly where those films were going to go. And the same is true for the original trilogy. Was Star Wars A New Hope was the beginning of the project, so that was sort of worked out much more on the fly, I suppose. Really, with The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, again, George had a fairly good idea about how those films were going to play out in terms of the story of them. And they took 3 years of production. These films are taking 2 years of production. From the point with Episode 9 where JJ says, yes, I'm going to do the film, to the point where it's going to be released at the cinema, there's just a 2-year window, starting off with nothing, no story, absolutely nothing whatsoever. And it is such a bizarre way to make Star Wars. I really can't believe that this is how Disney and Lucasfilm have chosen to make Star Wars, and it is worrying because it tells us that it's been made up very much on the fly, with no thought, no preparation, no planning, just throwing it all together. as so often with Kathleen Kennedy's Star Wars films, there's just no thought or process going into these movies whatsoever, and that is why the fans are so unhappy, because they're not sitting down to think, what is the story we are trying to tell, what do we want to do with our characters, where do we want to take them through the progression of the trilogy, and the fans know that that's what's happening. The fans can sit in a cinema, see the results, and they know this is not up to scratch. The critics, for some odd reason, seem to really like these sequel trilogy films. But the fans know that as they're sitting there, that this is not how Star Wars is supposed to be created. And it's just very, very worrying, very depressing. And it's interesting that JJ Abrams is already getting this out there, that with a 2-year window, which is a very short time frame really for such a big project, with just a 2-year window, he had absolutely nothing whatsoever at the start. JJ wants us to know that. I think he probably wants us to know that for a reason. That reason is probably that this film is going to contain a lot of the problems that all of the other sequel trilogy films and all of the other Kathleen Kennedy produced Star Wars films have contained. So it's a bit worrying, but we've got the trailer coming up on Friday and also the title reveal. I suspect the trailer is going to look absolutely amazing. They always do. Star Wars trailers always look great. But I think when we get to the end of the year, when we get to December and we see the finished result, I'm expecting that it's going to be, once again, a pretty disappointing result based on the way the film has been thrown together at the last minute yet again. I just hope that when this film is done, then finally Kathleen Kennedy will leave Lucasfilm. They'll get somebody in that actually knows what they're doing. Hopefully the Rian Johnson trilogy will be finally, once and for all, put out of its misery, and we can move on with the Benioff and Weiss trilogy, which probably is going to be Old Republic, and we'll have a new overseer within Lucasfilm. And that's what I'm hoping for. Whether it happens, we'll have to wait and see. But Star Wars can't keep going on like this, with films just being made up as a hodgepodge of this and that, and hope that something sticks. It's not the way Star Wars should be created. They shouldn't be going constantly through these directors who are always being fired and then new people being brought in at the last minute. It is not how Star Wars should be created. Right, I'll go over this interview a little bit more tomorrow when I've got a bit more time, and we'll see what else JJ had to say. If he said anything that's relevant to Star Wars Episode 9, then I'll do another video. Otherwise, we'll be talking about the trailer and title reveal at the end of the week. Please like, share and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and that's all for now. Thanks for watching.